Hello again, everyone. This will be the first kind of talk specifically about the grant process. These are going to be a little bit different depending on which grants you choose. Now, for this class, I'm kind of stripping it down a little bit, trying to simplify it so that it's a little bit more digestible for you. Certain grant projects are really complicated. Some of them are very simple. It really depends on the grant you're applying for. So you just have to read through the material and try to find the answers to these questions. For us, for our class, okay, I am only looking at three main parts: the narrative, okay, the budget, and then the schedules, flow chart, etc. That's basically your time organization. So I'll talk about budgets and I'll talk about flow charts and schedules here in a little bit. Today we're going to look at for this lecture we'll look at grant narratives. Now, the idea behind a grant narrative, okay, is that you are telling a compelling story to the group that wants to give you money. Okay, so there are some effective ways to think about this, to approach grant narratives, because if you can tell a gripping and compelling story, and I don't mean like a short story, okay, you're not making things up, but being accurate, being sounding excited about the project really can help. Okay, in this sense is the why questions that you ask at the beginning of the grant process will lead you later to not so much what questions, okay, or how questions, but rather it will let you know what you need to solve the grant problem, how you are going to implement this. Okay, grants are intended to solve real problems. No grant funding agency wants to give out money for free to people who are just going to, kind of amorphously fix the world. So if I said, okay, you're asking for $100,000 to fix racism, okay, that's nice, but you see, that's so general that we can't, the grant agency wouldn't be able to say, like, okay, we might agree with your point, but where are you going to begin? What real problems, okay, are we trying to solve here? Other things that grant funders tend to want to see, how these grants will help your community. Now, by community, I don't just mean, your neighborhood, but it could be in terms of the national resources, okay, regional. Think of community in terms of the nation or the region, okay. Other communities, though, include research communities. So your school, getting grants to help getting grants to help fund lab research, getting grants to fund if you do like a postdoc at an institute, getting grants to help that, or getting grants for your job. Certain jobs actually have grant writers that will either seek funding or they will help you and your teammates to write grants. We have one at UB as well. These are resources that are always, or hopefully always, available to you in your job, institute, lab, school, whatever. But you really want to think about how you can help your community. That's what grants usually want to answer. Another thing to think about, things like, what are the effects of not getting that grant? Okay, so these are just broad questions that I want you to think about as you're developing your projects, because this will help to familiarize you with the grant itself, but also give you a stronger sense of the narrative. Okay, if you are really passionate about something, like for example, I don't understand it, but like when people are really passionate about sports and you talk to them and they can name all these statistics and all this, every team and who's playing what position, that passion comes through, right? I might not be at all interested in anything that they're saying, but that passion still is communicated. Okay, so that is that's a byproduct of knowing a subject very, very well. Okay, so in the sense of not getting the grant, right? What are the effects of that? That's something you really should think about. Okay, what are the regional or community implications for not getting that grant? Okay, these are factors that you can actually build into the narrative as you're writing it that will help the funding agency see why your project is so valuable, why your team is the best equipped to deal with it. Just as an example, over the last year, I have applied for a lot of grants. I got some of them, didn't get others. So me and a colleague, we applied for a grant to create a campus map because, well, UB needs one. So part of our pitch was, it makes the school look more professional. It helps students and faculty orient themselves to campus. The buildings aren't very clearly labeled, things like that. So we were talking about certain implications of the map not being there, which I think everybody can agree with, right? Gets a little confusing on campus sometimes. Right after Dorian, another colleague of mine and I hosted a set of expressive and trauma writing workshops to kind of help students deal with, the effects of PTSD after the hurricane. I mean, some of my students lost family members and homes, and I mean, it was really, really hard. And so, since I do creative writing, I worked in a little talk on what's called expressive writing, and it's a form of journaling as a way of working through trauma. So we got we teamed up with National Art Gallery of the Bahamas. We teamed up with them. We hosted some workshops, and I think the people that showed up really benefited from it. So we got some money for that. We got another grant to travel up to UB North to try to help do the same workshops to help those students up there who were hit directly. I got a grant to bring in some visiting writers, some writers that I know or know of, so they could come down and we could get a kind of cultural exchange and increase students' networking capabilities. That's super important, especially if you're aiming to go to grad school. There was another grant from the embassy in the Bahamas. I have won grants before at the embassy in Korea. Some of the grants I didn't get recently or in the past couple of years. I didn't get a couple research grants at UB. There was a huge grant that I was applying for at the Wellcome Foundation. It's out of Britain. I was asking for about $100,000. It took me 2 months to put this grant project together, and I didn't get it. The Institute for Humane Studies, they have a lot of grants. I actually don't agree with a lot of the principles of their research institute, so I wrote one that was it was polite, but I was trying to kind of push back against some of their thinking, and clearly didn't get that one. So that one I didn't take a lot of time on, but So anyway, those are just some of the grants I've received and not received. I mean, this is it's part of almost a monthly ritual. What grants am I going for now? Whom should I contact? How do I network? So these are just all things that we all go through. Okay. Now here are some narrative questions and thoughts. Now, when I say narrative here, what I'm actually referring to is when you go to, now this is for a research incentive grant. When you go to the foundation's webpage, okay, they're going to have all of these little stats and details that you have to read through very carefully, okay? This one is aimed at early career researchers. You have to be in Scotland. Here's what it's worth. Here's the duration. Here's the deadline, okay? And then you go through the criteria. So who can apply? Okay, clearly I can't apply. I'm not in Scotland. Now, project suitability. This is where you're starting to figure out what are the narrative prompts and questions this particular grant is looking for. Okay, so you start to see like, okay, they're not looking for this. They're looking for this. They're looking for this. They're looking for this. Okay, so these are, and then you have to look through unsuitable activities, practical details. This will usually let you know deadlines and stuff, how to apply. And here's another important one, the assessment criteria. Okay, these are the five categories that your application would be judged on. Always, always, always try to find these because you want to make sure, write these out as you are preparing to write your grant narrative. Write out all of these criteria, okay? Have them there on the page, have them taped to the wall in front of you because these are the points that are going to guide this particular research grant, okay? This is managing, that's downloading. Here's another one. This is for, I believe, interdisciplinary studies at neuroscience at Stanford. Okay, so apply by September 8th. If I were thinking of applying for this grant, I would not do it because clearly I wouldn't have time in a week. But it's just something to think about, okay? Because sometimes you might find a really good looking grant and then realize you've only got a week to apply. You have to give yourself time to set these grant projects up. They're actually really complicated at times. So here's another one, eligibility criteria. Am I eligible? Is my group eligible to apply for this grant? And then here's the review and selection criteria. Remember back here, these are the criteria. They're telling you what you need to stress and emphasize in your application process. Now, here in this grant, okay, this is pretty wide open, just like this other one. They're not telling you that you have to do it in relationship to the neuroscientific effects of climate change on. So sometimes they're going to be very specific. Sometimes they're going to be very general like this. So you have to watch out for these keywords. These help to shape the narrative that you are telling. So these are versions of narrative prompts. Always review the criteria and always review the keywords that they're using because those are keywords that are going to guide the structure and shape of your grant project. Clearly, they have application materials. They'll tell you all about that. But this is what I mean by the narrative, okay? Here's another one. If you want to go do a postdoc in Germany, okay. Prerequisites, you have to be linked to a research institute, got to be a postdoc, and here's their objective. Here's the scope of their funding. And if you go to the link here, their objectives are, okay, this. Here's the funding opportunities, and then they have a big list of the universities that they'll partner with, okay? So this section right here would help if I wanted to do something like this, would help to shape the narrative I'm writing. Here's another one. This is Radcliffe. So a very famous endowment at Harvard. So you can go in here. Who are the fellows? How do I become a fellow? How do I set up a research partnership? What if I'm a grad student? And you can go in here and actually look at other people's applications to see what other projects they've done. And then this can give you an idea of how to shape this. If you were applying for this fellowship or a similar grant, it would help you to shape your research pitch, your narrative pitch, okay? So you can see here, it's all pretty general, but here's one guy who won it, and you can see here he's got links to TED stuff, got a little interview, and you can see that got a link to his website. Anyway, so you can go in and try to do some research on projects that have won other grants. Okay, so usually they'll have a list of previous winners or previous awards, and so go in there, look at what they did. Now don't steal or copy it, obviously, but use that as a kind of guiding model to your own grant narrative. Okay. Now, these narrative questions and thoughts, okay, you have to convince yourself why this project is important. If you don't care about it, the grant institution, the grant funding institution, won't care about it either. Like I said, your enthusiasm for the project is what is fueling your motivations to apply. Now, trust me, I know that for this class, I don't expect everybody to just be gung-ho about whatever grant proposal you work out, because these are just mock grants. Like, I don't expect you to be super enthusiastic about it. But in the future, right, if you're looking for funding, if you're looking for money from these institutions, you have to choose projects that are important to you. I always tell my PhD and even my master's students when they're writing their dissertations or theses, I always tell them, choose a topic that is interesting to you, because like with a PhD, you're spending 3 to 5 years on a single subject, on a single author, on a single period. It can get really boring. A lot of PhDs burn out simply because they get bored of the subjects they chose. Okay, so it's the same in grant projects. Choose something that's important. Choose something that you think is valuable. Okay, because if you think it's valuable to your core, that will come through in how the narrative sounds, how the project looks, right? Now, this is another important aspect. What issues, tangible issues, are you clearly aiming to solve? Okay, so if I just said, oh, I want $100,000 to solve racism, okay, yeah, racism exists, but you see that there aren't tangible, right, aspects that I am looking at. So I would have to break that idea down into smaller sections that are clear and tangible, and those are the issues that my project, okay, would want to try to solve. So we're not going to solve racism, okay, but we might be able to solve racist representations in Floridian media or wherever. You see, though racist representation in the media in Florida, right, that's a very specific, tangible, and clear thing that we might aim to solve. Okay, so that's what I mean by you might want to solve racism, but you have to make it tangible, because otherwise that funding board is going to look at your project and say it's too big, it's too unclear, it's too cloudy, we don't know what you're talking about. Okay, usually that lack of clarity comes from not knowing these why questions and answers. Okay, if we think of your narrative, remember we have those other criteria points, like where was it? Where are you? Like these, okay? these are things you need to address, but also when you are building your project, why is this grant important for your community or the community or a community? What other things can result from the grant project? This is actually very important because grant funding organizations, they really love to see things like that, where they say, if I get this money, I'm looking to solve Y. I'm looking to fix this, but there also might be, right, other kind of collateral benefits that result from what I'm trying to solve. Okay, so I get this grant, I solve this issue for the community, but also these might be aided in some way. Okay, grant funding organizations really love to see this one. This is, like I said earlier, this is a super important question as well. What if it's not funded? What if you do not receive funding, right? So what you're trying to do there is emphasize the importance of your grant project in relationship to its non-existence. Okay, if you don't get this funding, you know, the world will end, right? Or racism may continue in the Floridian media, you know, something like that. Okay, nobody wants that. So that is an implication directly about the if you don't receive funding. Regional implications. This is once again, it's related to this idea of this collateral benefit. Okay, because if you think about the community, like let's say we're trying to solve this problem, right, and it's kind of small. Well, you might say that the regional implications, okay, if we solve it in South Floridian media, maybe that will echo out into media representations in Florida, which then media representations in America. You see that you're trying to localize the issue you're solving, but also give a sense that it will ripple outward, that the problems you're solving here, though, you know, important and minor, have larger implications. Okay, that's just a really good way of thinking about how to shape the narrative of your grant project. Okay. Another thing to discuss, if it's necessary in the narrative structure, like if the grant is asking for it, and this is really true, but grants lead to other grants. You know, when I got my first grants quite a few years ago, it was kind of a long shot. I wasn't asking for a lot of money. I think it was about $1,000 to do something, and but that $1,000, first of all, it gave me the experience, and it gave me a little boost on my CV, my resume. And I get to look back and say, okay, well, this grant led to, you know, experience and all of this, and it led to other funding. But here, the idea is this. When I was pitching one of my ideas to the embassy, they said, well, do you already have money for the project? And I said, well, no, not yet. And I was told very specifically, I said, well, we really like funding projects that already have some money in them. Okay. So sometimes getting a little grant, even if it's $500, that's something, that's not a small amount of money, can lead to successively larger grants, because those other agencies, they say, oh, well, you got a grant from there? Well, sure, we'll fund you. You know, it's all about the kind of building the authority of yourself as a serious grant writer. Another thing to think about as you are writing the narrative, because this is usually part of it, since you're all working in teams, I put this here, but very often, like if you're doing a fellowship or an individual grant, you know, think of this as applying to yourself. Who's your team? Why are they the best? Okay. So if you have, you know, I'm putting you guys into groups of 4 to 5, and I did that because all of you have different majors. So you might have a chem major, let's say med, let's say, English major, and let's say physics. Okay. Now you see here we have so many different disciplines. We have so many different fields of study. Now, how can you spin that into a strength, right? You could talk about the diversity of your team. You could talk about the interdisciplinarity. Okay, this is a very interdisciplinary set of team and people and skills. So you could emphasize that. If you're all in chemistry, if every single one of your team members is in chemistry, emphasize that. So in that sense, it helps you to understand the team as a collection of individuals whose strengths come together to make a much, think of it like this. You know, it's that the idea the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay, that's kind of what you're trying to emphasize here. Okay, now if you're talking just about yourself, that's fine, but you still have to discuss this in even in a fellowship application. Why you? You know, these grant applications are very similar to job applications, right? Why should I hire you? Why should I trust you? Why should I give you money? Okay, so these are very important things to consider as you're doing your grant narratives. Now, once again, and this is just, I cannot emphasize this enough because I get criticized on this in some of my grants too. So I'm guilty of this one. What are the realistic goals? Okay, you're not going to figure those goals out after funding. So don't say things like, well, once we get money, we'll figure out what we're doing. No. You want to emphasize realistic goals, okay? And those are, like I said, tangible goals, okay? If you are doing a grant project that's going to last 6 to 12 months and you are, I don't know, you said, oh, my team will find a cure for cancer in 6 to 12 months. That's not realistic at all. Okay, so you have to break down. It's sort of like solving racism, right? You have to kind of break that down into a digestible chunk so that when that board looks at it and they say, okay, they're looking to solve these 3 things, okay, in relationship to cancer. Okay, great. But you can't just take on this giant project. Okay, you have to really break down. Somebody's on a moped outside. You have to break down these larger categories into digestible chunks so that your project doesn't look unrealistic. Because I have submitted grant projects before, and they were polite when they wrote back, but they basically just said, you're trying to do too much with too little time and too little money. And me, being an overachiever, I would think, of course, well, yeah, I can do it. But it's not about you, it's about the perceptions of you. That grant funding group, if you look like you're trying to take on the world, okay, they are going to notice that, and it's probably going to mean you won't get the grant. And once again, directly do this. Address every keyword and question in the narrative prompts, okay? So we looked at a couple of those here. Sometimes they're very general. But like I said, as you're doing this, copy and paste them, print them out, type them out, okay? Write them out so that you have that right there at the top of the document. Okay, you can erase them later, but always be looking to those. So when they have one, we're looking for this, and this, okay? That's the structure that you want to follow. That is the exact structure they want to see. How is your project sustainable? How is your project, how does it affect the community? How does it address the specific issue, right? What are its implications? Once again, for other grants or future research, why you? Okay, so you have to pay very close attention to the key words that each grant is going to list in the question and the narrative prompts. Okay, so that's a kind of outline for some of these grant narratives. I'm going to go online and find just some examples of these, but you'll see that all successful grant narratives will they'll have the same basic sound and shape, okay? And they're successful because they follow these models as closely as possible. When you're doing grants or fellowships or applying for scholarships, you are not reinventing the wheel. Okay, it's just like we'll discuss with the science papers. You have to follow these guidelines because these are the guidelines that are expected. Okay, so you're not going to come in and write your grant narrative in a colorful font with, a floral pattern in the margin, right? They are very rigid, very strict, even though they're a little flexible, guidelines that we have to follow in doing these. So I will talk next about budgets and how those look, how those work, how you can set those up, how to make them believable, as well as schedules, flow charts, and graphs. So anyway, that's all for grant narratives. So thank you.